There are stages in a long marriage when you begin to sense that something between you has shifted, even though nothing dramatic has happened. It's not a moment you can point back to, and it's not tied to one argument, one change, or one disappointment. It's simply a feeling that what used to feel naturally close now feels slightly farther away. Not gone, not broken, just different in a way you don't have a name for yet. You notice it most clearly in the quiet ways the relationship used to refill itself without effort. There was a time when showing care didn't require deciding to do it. It was simply part of the way you were with each other. But over the years, those small expressions that once kept the connection warm begin to thin out. You don't necessarily stop caring. You just stop noticing that you're not caring in the same way. It happens gradually. You begin responding more out of habit than intention. You listen, but your attention drifts. You talk, but the meaning behind the words doesn't carry the same weight. You still function as a team, handling responsibilities, sharing decisions, moving through routines, but the part that used to feel like us feels softer, quieter, less vivid. Not because anything is wrong, but because the emotional closeness that once refreshed itself now relies on effort you don't even realize has faded. This is where micro disconnects begin to accumulate. They're not loud or obvious. They look like nothing from the outside. But inside the relationship, they create a subtle imbalance. You miss something small and they miss something small, and both of you tell yourselves it's nothing. In the moment, it is nothing. But repeated over time, these micro disconnects create a slow drifting two people, not moving away intentionally, but moving less toward each other. And that's the strange part. The fading doesn't come from a lack of love. It comes from a lack of attention. When you've been together long enough, you start assuming you already know what the other person feels, what they need, what they meant. You stop checking, stop clarifying, stop looking closely. That familiarity feels efficient, but it quietly erodes the sense of being seen. You can still care deeply about someone while simultaneously failing to make them feel cared for. You can still love someone while drifting away from the experience of loving them. Unspoken hurt forms in that space, tiny moments of feeling dismissed or overlooked that you brush aside instead of addressing. You don't want to make things bigger than they are. They don't want to start unnecessary tension. So the moment passes, then another, and another. None of them feels significant alone. But each one slightly changes the angle of your emotional posture. You begin protecting parts of yourself you used to offer freely. You become more cautious about what you say or how much you show. Not because you're trying to hide, but because somewhere along the way, you stopped expecting certain things to land the way they once did. Effort begins to fade in the same quiet way. Not because either person is lazy or indifferent, but because the relationship has become something stable enough that you stop feeding it consciously. The familiarity that once felt comforting now becomes a place where you no longer feel the need to try. But connection only survives when both people continue choosing it, even in small ways. When those choices stop happening, love doesn't disappear. It just becomes something that requires more intention than it receives. Curiosity is often the first thing to fade. When you've been together long enough, you assume you already understand each other completely. But emotional closeness relies on a kind of ongoing interest, a desire to keep learning the other person as they evolve. Without that, the relationship becomes more of a shared life than a shared world. You still function together, but the aliveness between you weakens, not in a painful way, just in a quiet, almost unnoticeable way. And when curiosity fades, presence fades with it. Not the physical presence of being together, but the emotional presence that makes togetherness meaningful. You can sit beside someone you love and feel a distance that didn't used to exist. You can talk about your day and feel like the conversation didn't actually connect. You can go through an entire week without realizing you haven't really checked in on each other's inner world. What complicates it further is that both people often feel this shift but don't know how to express it without sounding dramatic or ungrateful. You don't want to blame them. You don't want to seem needy. You don't want to risk conflict over something you're not even sure how to articulate. So the noticing remains internal. And when something is only felt internally, it quietly grows. That's how love fades, not in a loud collapse, but in a soft thinning. Not because something huge went wrong, but because too many small things lost their weight. Not because two people stopped loving each other, but because they stopped nourishing the connection that made that love feel alive. And part of understanding this part of being honest about how relationships change is realizing that fading doesn't always mean failing. Sometimes it's simply the first sign that something needs attention again. Something that once thrived naturally now needs intention to stay alive. There comes a point in every long relationship when you start realizing that the distance you feel didn't appear out of nowhere. It's the outcome of small things left unattended, not dramatic breaks, not betrayals, not moments that would change the direction of your life if you named them. It's the quiet accumulation of what was never talked about, never checked in on, never revisited. And when you finally acknowledge that something inside you softens in a way you didn't expect, you start seeing how often love changes shape before anyone notices. In the beginning, connection feels effortless. You give without thinking. You listen with intention. You show care instinctively. But as time passes, the relationship starts relying more on the life built around it than the bond inside it. Routines hold things together. Habits fill the spaces where deeper connection once lived. Stability becomes the structure that replaces attention. And while stability is necessary, it is not the same as closeness. It becomes clearer that fading doesn't mean the love stopped existing. It means the foundation hasn't been replenished. A marriage stretches across years filled with responsibility, stress, repetition, and predictable patterns. Without noticing, both people begin living slightly more in their own world and slightly less in the shared one. Not by choice, not out of resentment, just slowly, naturally, quietly. And when you see it from this perspective, blame loses its power. It's not about who should have tried more or who let things drift. In long relationships, drifting is almost inevitable unless there is deliberate effort to renew connection. Even the strongest bond weakens when it stops being nurtured. Even the most loving couple experiences emotional distance if they assume closeness will maintain itself. There's also a kind of grief that comes with acknowledging this shift, not the grief of losing someone, but the grief of realizing how easily two people can become distant while still loving each other. A sadness for all the small moments that could have been deeper if either person had paused to notice. A heaviness for the ways both hearts protected themselves instead of reaching out. It's not dramatic, but it's real, and it sits with you in a very human way. But inside that grief, there's also clarity, the recognition that fading is reversible if it's understood. Emotional distance doesn't grow because two people stop caring. It grows because they stop returning to the connection the relationship was built on. They stop asking questions with genuine curiosity. They stop sharing the parts of themselves that aren't visible on the surface. They stop checking in, emotionally thinking the other person already knows what's going on inside. But no matter how long two people have been together, inner worlds continue changing, and those changes need to be seen to be felt. You begin realizing that love asks for continued awareness. To feel close to someone, you have to keep looking at them with the intention to see who they are now, not who you remember them to be. You have to keep choosing to understand them even when you think you already do. You have to make space for their quiet fears, their small joys, their unspoken needs, because those things shift over time and the relationship shifts with them. The truth is, emotional closeness doesn't disappear because two people stop loving each other. It disappears when they stop revisiting the emotional bridge between them. That bridge is made of small gestures, honest conversations, gentle curiosity, and the willingness to stay open even when life feels heavy. Without those things, love becomes something stored rather than something lived. You also understand that fading isn't a failure. It's a signal. A reminder that even the most stable relationships require renewal, a nudge to return to the connection that once felt natural but now needs intention. There's no shame in that. There's no weakness in admitting it. It's simply part of the lifespan of long-term love. And this understanding leads to something quieter but deeper acceptance. Not the kind that says this is how it will always be, but the kind that recognizes what has been happening without judgment. Acceptance opens the door for change, not forced change, not urgent change, just the kind of change that comes from being honest about what the relationship has become. You begin holding the truth gently. Love fades when the people inside it become less attentive, less curious, less emotionally present. But it can also return when those things return. The shift isn't final. It's simply the result of distance that no one meant to create. And distance can shrink when awareness grows. Maybe that's why acknowledging the fade matters. Not to dwell on what's missing, but to recognize what still exists. The history, the care, the loyalty, the quiet ways the relationship endured even when it wasn't at its strongest. Those things are real. They're part of the story too. So you sit with the understanding that relationships don't stay alive because two people stay together. They stay alive because two people continue choosing each other with intention, even in small ways. When effort returns, connection returns. When curiosity returns, closeness returns. When two hearts soften toward each other, again, love finds its way back into the spaces it drifted out of. And maybe the real truth is this: love doesn't fade because it's fragile. It fades because it's human. And anything human needs tending.